So thank you everybody for attending today. Today's our last seminar series of this academic year. We will be back in September, so watch out for information about our new series. But I'm delighted to introduce you today to Jill Carlton, who is part of the Research Design Service, who's going to give a presentation about how the RDS, the Research Design Service, can help you and your fellowships.
So hi everybody, it's great to be able to talk to you today. It's a bit of an ambitious topic to try and get through in an hour, well not even an hour, because hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and answers, so please don't hesitate to pop anything in the chat. I'll try and take questions if I can. I think the thing I'd like to point out before we start is that normally this whole talk, this presentation, takes place over an event that we run for a whole day, so it will very much be a whistle-stop description of what the RDS can offer you if you're thinking about either applying for a fellowship or potentially looking at a fellowship in the future and developing your career. So what we're going to cover today is to try and highlight what a fellowship is, what it is that reviewers look for when they are critiquing fellowship applications and helping determine whether somebody should be shortlisted for interview, and then some other factors that you as potential applicants should think about. And as I say, hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So what is a fellowship? Well, forgive me if some of you already know this, but in the context of NIHR fellowships, these are an opportunity for you to undertake a piece or a body of research such that you can find out an answer to a research question. But the difference between a fellowship and a project piece of funding is that it's also an opportunity for you to develop as an individual, because you can cost in training within the fellowship itself, not just in terms of the financial cost, but also the time in order to be able to undertake that training. So yes, the NIHR really would like you to find out an answer to your research question, but they're also really wanting to develop you as an individual because they see the potential of you as a future leader. So what is it that reviewers look for? Well, some of you may have heard of this already, but really reviewers follow a pretty standard approach when they're considering fellowship applications, in that they look at the PPPTS. So that's the person, the project, the place, the training and the supervision. And I'm going to quickly break down each one of those components to give you some examples of how reviewers consider each of these. It's important for me to point out that a reviewer wouldn't expect everybody to have everything in place, particularly with respect to the person component. So with the person element, the reviewer wants to find out a little bit more about you. So what are you doing at the moment with respect to research? Does your current role link with the proposed project? Perhaps you've got some areas where you can describe how you've developed your research skills, and that you might have a bit of a story to that. So for example, you may have completed a master's qualification, maybe your first experience in research was completing a dissertation, and what did those skills bring to the table? Maybe the topic was is something that you're now building on for this fellowship application. So they're wanting to see a bit of a story about how you've got to where you are now and how you want to develop further in the future. Most people who submit fellowship applications have publications behind them. It's obviously, fellowships are competitive awards, you need to stand out, so there will be an expectation of some level of publication, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. And for some people as well, there will be details where they can put in about what grants or awards that they may have won. And those awards might be, say, for example, the highest mark in their dissertation, or perhaps an award related to a degree, or indeed a bursary or something such as that. So as I mentioned, they're looking at your experience, and your research experience might not be anything particularly stellar. No, we're not expecting people to be the polished article, where reviewers are looking at the potential. If you were an amazing, already world leader researcher, then you probably wouldn't be going for a junior level fellowship. So they want to sort of see that you've got that potential, really, and that there is, as I mentioned, a journey behind you, and that journey can be a mix between sort of clinical and academic components. And it really allows you the opportunity to kind of explain why you've chosen this proposed project, and we'll come on to the project component later. And in some people, as I've mentioned, there is this sort of this sort of clear progression from master's projects or perhaps other postgraduate projects into the proposed project that you're outlining within your fellowship application itself. Obviously, it's important to identify and point out all your areas of expertise and any awards and distinctions that you might have. And really, you've got to think very carefully about every component here. And the reviewers aren't likely to be specialists within your either clinical or academic area. So don't be shy. This is not a time to be shy. Put forward everything that you can think of. You might have been an invited speaker at certain components. You might lead special interest groups. You might lead a journal club. You might be the local go-to person in terms of advice for ethics applications, which in itself shows a good knowledge of sort of research and the research and governance components that are linked to that. Some people who are going for fellowships do have experience around sort of teaching and other supervision activities. Again, this is not true for everybody. And as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, the reviewers wouldn't expect you to have everything, but it's just thinking about all different ways in which you can demonstrate that you are committed and you're aware of how research sits within both your profession, but also in the wider context of the world, really. You may already take part in mentoring opportunities at either at a formal or informal level. It might be something that you do within your trust or within your department that maybe isn't necessarily recognised within your job title, but you can provide evidence of that. You might also want to consider evidence of leadership. So this is where people are looking at you to sort of be that future leader, and it might be that you have that within your professional role, that you might already be a team leader, you might be the manager of a team, you might already have a senior position within your department. It might be on a more informal level in terms of mentorship. Some people might be principal investigators or the site lead for larger studies or something such as that. So think of examples in which you're sort of showing leadership and that you're showing ways in which you're already wanting to inspire others, because that's what the reviewers are wanting. That's what the NIHR are wanting, for you to be the next big thing, and that people are sort of wanting to be around you and wanting to, you know, aspire to be you. So think about any areas of expertise and experience which also link to any training that you might have had, any existing collaborations, either within a sort of formal or informal basis, but also within any clinical experience as well. It's important to get across within this section about your sort of relevant expertise and experience, about where you want to be in 5 years' time. So what does this fellowship, you know, what's it going to bring to you on an individual level? You know, this is where a fellowship really does differ from a project grant, because they're wanting to, the reviewers are wanting to see how it's going to be an effective vehicle for you to develop, both potentially clinically or academically. How is it going to help facilitate networking and collaborations with the key people within the field? So, and what is it that you want to be? You know, be quite bold in your statements around that. So I mentioned a couple of moments ago about publications, and that fellowship applications are indeed competitive. You know, you need to make yourself stand out. But it's important to recognise that there isn't a magic number, and that everybody's story is very different. It's not related to age, it's not related to when you qualified or anything such as that. but it's very much dependent upon where you are within your career. And does it match that? You know, are you sort of working in the right lines? So there is no magic number. A reviewer won't look and say, oh, they've only got 2, or oh, they've got 12. We must definitely recommend. It's all taken into context. But dissemination isn't just about publications in terms of journal publications. So think about other ways in which you might disseminate your research findings. And these might be at conference presentations, at either a national or international stage. It might be that you've shown your work on posters somewhere, perhaps at a trust or a university level. You might write a blog in which you've disseminated your work to a wider, perhaps a more a different audience, potentially, maybe websites, maybe you're using Twitter. So dissemination is not just about papers. So think a little bit outside the box there. There is a difference, obviously, when reviewers look at fellowship applications, about whether they're looking at sort of pre-doctoral, so whether you're going for a doctoral fellowship or whether you're going for an advanced fellowship. This is a postdoc where you've already got your PhD. And I've popped some numbers on there in terms of publications, but actually the more experienced I am as an RDS advisor, and the more feedback that we get from looking at people's successful and unsuccessful fellowship applications, is I think the numbers on there are quite arbitrary. You know, as I mentioned, it's very competitive. I think those numbers are probably a little bit on the low side, but there have been people who have been shortlisted for interview with those kind of numbers. So as I say, they do take it into context as to where you are within your career at the time of application submission. But as you can see from that slide, there is a definite difference as to how you're judged by reviewers, whether you're going for that sort of pre-doc level fellowship, which is where you're going to apply for a fellowship in order to undertake a PhD, or those postdoc fellowships, those advanced fellowships, where you're looking at that next step of developing a team and building a team around you. So that is a very, very quick whiz through about the person, and we're now going to sort of look at each of the other components, and we'll take each one of those in turn. So the problem, this is the project is around a problem, you know, really, that you've probably observed in your day-to-day work. It's very hard as an RDS advisor to advise about whether a project is a good idea or not. And so one of the things that I'm often asked is, you know, where do people get their project ideas from? And for me, the best projects are ones where people have observed a problem on a day-to-day basis. And you're talking about it to your colleagues, going, oh, this isn't right, or this doesn't fit. I wonder why this happens, or I wonder why this doesn't happen. And those discussions can help sort of, you know, germinate the ideas that you've got around your project. And then once you've kind of got the beginnings of a bit of an idea in your head, you need to have the ability to be able to explain that problem in a minute, which is obviously a very short period of time. And the reason I say a minute is that you're going to have to convince a lot of people that, you know, this problem is indeed a problem, and that your fellowship, that your proposed project is going to fix that problem. And you're going to have to convince a lot of people. You're going to have to convince your colleagues, because you're going to want them to help support you in developing your fellowship application. You may have to convince potential supervisors if you're going for that PhD level fellowship, or mentors if you're going for that advanced fellowship. You might want to convince people to come on as an advisory group member to your team. You're going to have to convince your head of department that you can go for this. You're going to have to convince your manager. So, you know, you need to get that sort of idea in your head, and that you're going to be able to articulate that idea in a very short period of time, because all the people listed on that screen there don't have a lot of free time to listen to you about it. In terms of the project, you know, I could sit here and spend more than a day going through, you know, what works in projects and what doesn't work. But the things that you need to bear in mind is that reviewers don't really care about your methodological approach. There are more than one way we can skin a cat, and the same can be said for answering any research question. So reviewers don't mind about how you're going to answer that research question, as long as that research question and your work is within remit for the funder, so within remit for the NIHR, that your project is worthwhile, that it is likely going to develop some benefit to the patients or public, that it's coherent, it's clearly described, it's realistic within the proposed timescales of your fellowship application, and also that it's ethically sound. So the RDS can help advise you around different components of that, but there's no way in which I can kind of discuss every different proposed methods within this short webinar today. So in terms of what else reviewers look for, well, we mentioned the place. So there's things to consider here in terms of your host institution. So this is the host institution in terms of the host academic institution. So is it already a leading centre for this type of work? So say, for example, you're wanting to do a project around paediatric health, and you currently work in you know, care of the elderly. You may not necessarily be best placed to where you are, and similarly the same thing can be said around academic institutions. So some academic institutions are more recognised for some types of work rather than others. The reviewers want to know that that institution are also invested in you and invested in your proposed project. So are they going to be able to support you within your journey of undertaking a fellowship? And do they have any experience of doing that? So do they already have NIHR fellows within their school or within their university, and how is that going? You know, how embedded are they within it? What sort of mechanisms are in place in order to be able to support those fellows? So you need to be able to describe this within the application form itself, and this is something that you're going to have to find out about what that academic institution can do for you in order to be able to help you with that. So for some people, they might decide to host their fellowship at an academic institution which is not necessarily near where they live. So say, for example, you know, I live in Sheffield, but it may be that the most appropriate place for me to do my fellowship might be in Bristol, and I might want to do my studies remotely, but I chose Bristol because it's the best place for that type of work that I've described within the proposed project. You don't have to geographically move in order to be able to do it. It does make things a little bit harder, but if there's one thing that COVID has shown us is that we can be more flexible in our working. So another component is training, and training is really key within a fellowship, because this is really what sets it apart between a project application rather than a fellowship, because as I mentioned previously, a fellowship is looking about investing in you as an individual. So they're looking to see what skills you currently have, but also what skills you're going to need in order to be able to answer that research question. And the skills that you've and the needs that you've identified, are those appropriate for the project, or are you just whacking anything in just because you think it'll be good to learn about X or Y or Z? So they're looking for the type of training that you've identified, and they're looking about when it is that you're going to say that you're going to do that training. So say, for example, you're wanting to interview people as part of your project, and that you're saying you're going to interview people in year 1, you're going to undertake that qualitative research in year 1, but you don't do the training for that qualitative research until year 3. The reviewers are like, well, hang on a minute, there's no attention to detail here, you haven't thought about this doesn't make sense. So they're looking at all aspects of, you know, are you really considered, have you really thought about what it is that you want to do and how you're going to be able to achieve it. They're also looking for a mixture of both internal and external courses, because any academic institution will offer internal courses, and those are often very, very good and of a very, very high standard. But as you guys will all know, that you know, within wherever we work, whether we work in a university or whether we work in the NHS, is that often there's very little chance for us to go on courses, and this is a real opportunity for you to be able to experience some things that you might not normally be able to do, quite frankly, because of resources. And it's an opportunity for you to cost in those external courses, which generally cost a lot of money, but they're highly beneficial because you get to see different standpoints. So they might be external courses run by different universities, like short courses, or they might be run by companies. But is there a good mix of that? Is there a good mix such that you're getting a well-rounded approach? But of course, training isn't just about sitting on a course. Sometimes we learn best by watching and doing over a prolonged period of time. So I have seen in applications where people put in for secondments, either to another academic institution or to another clinical academic institution, such that they can learn skills in different ways. And that secondment doesn't necessarily have to be within the UK either, as long as it's linked and there's a sound rationale for having it included. And if you are going for like a clinical fellowship, they would obviously want to know about what training that you've got in there, about how you're going to develop clinically as well as develop as a researcher. So in terms of supervision, well, obviously supervision differs depending upon whether you're going for that doctoral fellowship level where you're wanting to get a PhD, or that postdoc level, that advanced fellowship level where you've already got your PhD but you're wanting to develop further as an independent researcher. So in that context, you're looking more at mentors rather than a PhD supervisor, obviously. It's very, very common to have, anyway, now undertaking a PhD, whether you're doing it as a part of a fellowship or not, but it's very common to have 2 PhD supervisors, if not 3, in some cases even 4. But reviewers are looking to see, are those supervisors appropriate for the project? Are they going to be able to help you along your journey of answering that research question, but also help you develop as an individual? So do they have the clinical skills, potentially, such that, you know, if you're doing a PhD research project around asthma, you know, your advisors or your supervisors, are they linked to that sort of clinical area? Can they put things into context in terms of the clinical management of the condition? Or are they more methodologically based, such as that if you're wanting to do, for example, qualitative work, does your potential supervisors have skills in that area? Are they recognised for that? And it's quite good to have a balance across the board, particularly if you're considering clinical context of work. The other thing that reviewers consider is that are they in themselves a safe pair of hands? So do they have experience of seeing PhD students through to completion? You know, I'm sure you've all got the opportunity to talk to people who have had poor supervision arrangements and the detriment that can have upon an individual. So it's really important to kind of research this, to talk to people, to find out what individuals are like. And you're the consumer here. You know, you can talk to potential PhD supervisors or potential mentors, and if you're not getting that vibe, and if you're not, you know, then you don't have to go with them. You're not signing a contract or anything such as that. You know, you thank them for your time, and you know, you widen your search a little bit further. Obviously, you do have to list your potential supervisors or your mentors, but often supervision and support is beyond that as well. So you might have an advisory group, and the advisory group is not necessarily limited to a number, and the people on your advisory group are providing support for you along your sort of fellowship journey, but they're not necessarily putting in as much effort and commitment over that prolonged period of time as they may do if they were a formal supervisor or a formal mentor. So your advisory group can be made up of a whole host of different people, but they might not meet with you as regularly, or they might meet with you at only appropriate times within your fellowship period. So say, for example, you're doing a project and there's a small component that might be linked to health economics. You might want to speak to a health economist, say in year 3, but actually in year 1 and 2, you don't need to engage with them very much. In terms of mentors, for those people who are interested in advanced fellowships, they're looking here, reviewers are looking for you to move away from your kind of potentially your PhD supervisors. If you're thinking about, could my previous PhD supervisor be a mentor for me? And the answer is that they don't look on it very favourably. They're wanting kind of you to spread your wings a little bit, to kind of move away from your groups, and they really do prefer that your mentors are kind of externally located, just because you're getting that wider view point and that wider perspective, but also it gives you the opportunity to develop wider networks and collaborative networks as well. So there's a lot of benefits for it as well, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to skip that slide just now and move on to some other parts that you need to think about within developing your fellowship application, and will be included within your fellowship application, although they may not necessarily be specific parts of it on your form, but reviewers will still look at it. So we're going to go through each of these listed here. So the first aspect is public involvement, and I'm sure that you've all heard of public involvement and you're all familiar with it and why it is that we might do it. And obviously the NIHR and many other funders have a very strong view about the benefits that public involvement brings to any form of research. Public involvement in terms of a fellowship has to really be embedded within the whole fellowship process. So reviewers are wanting to look at how public involvement has already shaped the fellowship application, so how you've already got to this point and what public involvement has been done to either inform the project idea or how the methods that you're describing in the proposed project. But then moving forward, when you then get awarded the fellowship, is how you're going to keep that public involvement within every aspect of the fellowship itself, in terms of considering the analysis of your data, how you're going to interpret that, how you're going to disseminate it, how you're going to evaluate it, and so on. So really, public involvement really needs to be considered very, very carefully, and this is the sort of thing that takes an awful long time, even before you sit down to writing your fellowship application. And the Research Design Service have some specialist RDS advisors around public involvement. There's an awful lot of resources which the RDS have helped collaborate with, and of course the NIHR have helped developed as well. But one in particular that I'd like to draw your attention to is the Public Involvement Fund, because we do, it is recognised that undertaking public involvement activities can be difficult if you don't have the money for it. And if you're starting out on your research career, often we don't have pots of money in which we can just dip into. So there is a public involvement fund that people can apply to. It's a competitive call. It's not a very big form. It's nothing too arduous, but it offers up to £500 that people can apply for. And those calls are spread throughout the year. And these are a really good way of demonstrating in your fellowship application that you take public involvement very seriously, that you've really thought about it in the context of your fellowship application, but it's another tick on that you've won some money, you've got a grant, because it is peer reviewed, these applications. And there's more details about that on the website, and some examples of that, some examples of what people have used that money for. Something else which the NIHR and indeed many other funders are rightly looking at now is equality, diversity and inclusion. And this is indeed should be considered as part of fellowship applications as well. The NIHR have published their requirements in terms of what they view in terms of EDI, and perhaps as researchers or at whatever level, perhaps we haven't considered this as well as we could have in the past. Basically, what reviewers will be looking for is to ensure that your project is really and truly open to all. You know, have you considered everything such that you're allowing people who are interested to participate, irrespective of particular characteristics, including the ones that are listed on the slide there. So there won't be an explicit section on the application form to address this, but the consideration of these principles should be within your methodology, and you should have thought about that when you're designing your proposed project. And this is something that the RDS can help with in terms of help identify, well, are you being truly inclusive here, or have you thought about X or Y or Z? And it might be that you can't do anything and you can't do everything, but in helping identify potential areas of weakness, you can help negate any future tricky questions, either at interview or and so on. There obviously has been an awful lot of work done on this area within the last 18 months to 2 years, and there is the Include Ethnicity framework, which I encourage you to have a look at as well, and there's guidance on that, on completing that for applicants, and there's links of support and other things to consider on the slides, which will be available for you after today. So another thing that reviewers are keen on is the so what. So you've described an amazing project and how you're going to do it, and describe how you're going to develop as an individual, but it's a bit like, well, so what? What difference is this going to make in the future? So what impact is your research going to have? The problem with the term impact is it means different things for different people, and it can be a bit problematic to think about, well, what do we really truly mean by impact, and how can we measure that impact? And there's some examples of definitions on the slide there. In terms of what the NIHR view impact to be, it's this being able to show that the contribution that anybody's research makes to society or to individuals, be that in organisations or indeed in to countries. So impact is the term that we use for the outcome and not necessarily the process itself. And there are many academic institutions which offer support in order to be able to, for researchers and junior researchers to think about impact and about how to demonstrate impact. So the process of being able to demonstrate impact is perhaps better known as knowledge mobilisation, and there's lots of different things that come under that term of knowledge mobilisation, but the impact is actually the outcome itself. So it's important for you to think when you're developing your fellowship ideas and your fellowship application is like, well, how am I going to show any change? How am I going to show that things are better? You know, it is really that sort of so what, and how are you going to sort of capture that so what? So for some people, that so what is actually that there is change, that somebody then, you know, implements something, and some things are a bit harder to measure. And sometimes we can't measure impact until further down the line, and we you know, that kind of is recognised, but it is important for us to think about this in developing our research ideas, because as I mentioned, it is an important factor for reviewers. And finally, another thing that the RDS can help with is helping you think about costing your fellowship application. You do have to cost everything up very carefully, and if you don't cost things up carefully, and there's not evidence of you costing things up carefully, then reviewers kind of, you know, question, well, how much do you really want this? How much have you really thought about this? So there's a whole host of costs which are incorporated within people's fellowship applications, and the RDS can help a little bit with that, but more often than not, it's informed by people such as your host institution, either your proposed academic institution or your NHS institution. But things that you need to consider are things like your salary costs of any other researchers, if you're allowed to cost that in, and you need to look at that in the guidance if you're going for those advanced fellowships. Costing in for things like any equipment that you might need, any public involvement activities, and if you haven't costed in public involvement activities, then that really is an indication that you're not, you know, taking public involvement seriously. Have you costed in your training? Have you got travel expenses thought about for your training, for your public involvement work, and also those impact activities that you've got in there, and so on and so forth. So they're just some examples that I popped down on the slide there. So I feel like I've really rushed gone through this, but I just want to close in what the RDS can offer you in terms of support. So we do more than help advise you on the design of projects and design of studies ideas. So we can help identify potential funding sources, in which, you know, if you're going for a fellowship, you've probably pretty much identified your source already, but there might be some funding sources which can help you with some proof of concept work that you might want to do in advance of your fellowship application. We also work with lots of different people, both within our other jobs and our other roles, but also we are familiar with other RDS advisors, both within our regions and also across regions. The RDS is a national service, so we might be able to help identify potential collaborators for you. We might be able to help you, therefore, sort of bring together an appropriate team if you're looking at more sort of advanced fellowships here. We can help you identify some potential groups, either in terms of patients or carer groups, and how best to sort of involve those. We can give you advice about writing the plain English summaries. We can help you get that picture writing correct, because writing for applications and funding applications is very different style of writing compared to writing for journal publications. And we can signpost you to other specialist support. RDS advisors are a real mix of people in terms of their professional background. So we've got health economists, we've got systematic reviewers, information resource specialists, trialists, statisticians, economic modelers, a whole host of people, and we can signpost you to the most appropriate RDS advisor for the sort of help that you might need. And we can also flag up some potential regulatory issues that may be associated with some projects as well. But I think it's important to point out what we don't do as well. So we don't write your applications for you, okay? That's you, that's your job. And, you know, don't forget, this is to, when you're applying for a fellowship, you're wanting to demonstrate that you're the next big thing. So you shouldn't be really looking for us to write your application. The RDS supports funding applications for a whole host of streams, but there are some that we don't cover, and there is details on our website about what which funding streams that we do support and which that we don't. We don't support applications that aren't research, so we don't really support audit, but we can signpost you to people who might be able to help you with that. We don't provide supervision, so we would take our RDS hat off for that if that was the case, and if you wanted to consider somebody for PhD supervision, that's a different role entirely. And what we don't do is we don't continue to keep saying the same thing to you over and over again. So we can give advice and we work with you, and if you go away and then come back and nothing's changed, you know, there's only so many times that we can see things, so we don't keep going over and over and over the same thing. So what happens should you decide you want to meet with the RDS? Well, the first thing is we do a bit of a rough assessment as to what your idea is, how important that question is. We try and find out from you what are the work has been done in the area. We try and assess about whether you have got that sort of fellowship potential. We might sort of probe and ask you a few questions about you and your journey thus far. We might give you some pointers about your study design, give you some advice around the clinical area, the PPI, the costs, all that kind of thing. So the first appointment is potentially quite an intense one, where we discuss these things at quite a high level, and then any subsequent appointment might be around any particular component of that. So some people only need help in some areas, some people need help in all of them, and either's fine. What I would say is don't leave it too late to get in touch with us. So you know, early engagement with the RDS tends to work better for both you and for us. And it can also really help us if we've got an idea about what it is that you want to talk about in the first instance. So what proposed methods potentially, or what research idea that you might have, just that we can assign you to the appropriate advisor. We used to offer face-to-face meetings in the first instance, but obviously, as you can appreciate, over the last 18 months, things have been somewhat different. And actually, I think we've shown that sort of hybrid working and remote working is efficient. So we're quite happy to do Zooms or phone calls or any other sort of meeting in that way. And also, we can review draft applications as well. And you can get in touch with us via the website. So I realise I've been waffling for a long period of time, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open up for some Q&As. As I say, that was a very a quick way of going through things. We normally do that over a day.
Jill, thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation full of really useful information, and I can assure you, you were not waffling at all. We've got a couple of questions in the chat to start with. So Claire's going to kick off with the first question. So her first question is about training, if that's okay. Excuse me. So in terms of training, can you include funding for a course that potentially would help you develop as a clinician, but isn't actually really relevant for that research project that's actually the fundamental of your fellowship?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no. So there's within the NIHR fellowship scheme, there's one called the Integrated Clinical Academic Scheme, and there are eligibility criteria for that in terms of which professions can go for it. So yes, when people are going for that scheme, they are looking for, reviewers are looking for how you're going to develop as a clinical academic. So if you're wanting to get to that next stage within your clinical career as well, you know, what training might you need for that? So it might be a particular specialist course, I don't know, you know, a particular type of IV injection or something such as that. So yes, you could cost that in, but maybe your research project isn't necessarily about that. I'm sure in some ways you can think of a bit of a tangible link about how it would develop you. It's all about being able to pitch it. So yes, if you were going for that integrated clinical academic stream of fellowship applications and you didn't have in any ways in which you develop clinically, that's a bit of a red flag for reviewers. So yes, I would think about all potential clinical training in that. And that's something, again, that the RDS can help you on. If you kind of flag up and say, well, this is my project and this is what I think I'm going to put down. Do you think this will fly? We can give you our opinion on that.
Can I just expand that question a little bit, if that's okay?
Yeah.
So, if people were applying for the DRF, so they're applying for the non-ICA pathway, are they allowed to put some clinical training into that is relevant to their study, or is it all about research skills and knowledge development?
I think it's a balance of how much you put in for it. Is the honest answer to that. I think if you were putting in masses and masses and masses, I think there would be questions around it, and because it's a commitment about you developing as a researcher as well. But I think it also depends upon the context of which professions as well, because we do recognise that there are ceiling effects within some of the professions, particularly around some of the AHP type professions. So I think they do take that with a bit of a balance as well. So yeah, I would identify them and I would discuss it with your RDS advisor. If you are in any doubt about any of this, then the NIHR Academy, you can contact any of them. There's an email address on the NIHR website, and you can check with them specifically, like, would this be okay to include?
Absolutely, and I think I phone and email the Academy more than anybody else does, and they're very, very helpful. And I think sometimes we forget that they're humans at the end of the line to actually answer some of these questions. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, my experience with them has always been incredibly positive. And if the person who answers the phone doesn't know the answer, then they will get in touch with somebody who does. So yeah, I would encourage you to use them as a resource.
Excellent. So now we're going to move on to Eileen. And so Eileen, I kind of resonate with what you're talking about here. So Eileen asks, Her project is about reducing research waste and improving the ability to synthesize smaller research projects. So she's looking to develop a core outcome set, and a little concerned that actually that it might not have a direct patient impact, but more of an indirect patient impact.
Yeah, so I think what you've got to think about with stuff like that. So the NIHR has funded fellowship applications where it's around education. So, you know, if we're developing better clinicians, and that's all okay. And it seems akin to that because, you know, if we're looking about being able to conduct research effectively, and they've done work on this on trials about, you know, sort of minimum reporting standards, and that's been funded as part of fellowship applications. I would say that this comes within that. It's on the boundaries of it. So I think you need to think very clearly about and ask an explicit question to the NIHR: does it fulfil the remit? Is it going to show patient or public benefit in terms of outcomes? Now, the patient and public benefit maybe is that then clinicians are able to work more effectively, or collect data which helps inform clinical care more. But if it's too far away down that sort of path of being able to show patient or public benefit, then the reviewers might have some concerns. So I think it would be all about the pitch of how you best describe it, really, and about how you could then link it back to either improved care or improved outcomes in terms of services.
Thank you, that's really, really helpful. I can't see anybody else's hands, and I can't see any other questions, so I've got a couple, if that's okay.
Sure.
Can I refer you back to the slide where you had the lovely table about requirements for pre-doc and post-doc? So I get asked all those questions all the time by potential candidates. And can I just talk about the possible or probable collaborations for
yeah.
That's quite hard sometimes as an early career researcher who's just, you know, thinking about doing a PhD. They've done a master's, probably they've worked in some research environment. A lot of our staff are research delivery staff that are now transferring from research delivery to becoming, in, you know, thinking about being on their own. So they don't have that collaboration. They don't have that yet. How would they address that in their applications?
Okay, so I would argue that they do have those collaborations. I think it's all about how they describe those collaborations. So so sometimes some of the clients that come and see me, they say, oh, you know, I haven't really done any research. I've just, you know, I was kind of peripherally involved with this study where, you know, I just took consent from people to this. And I'm just like, no, you didn't just take consent from people. You know, that shows an awareness of a whole host of research processes, and in knowing those, you can demonstrate that, you know, there's a number of governance aspects, but you have to have also worked with other people, so you have those collaborations. So you're likely to have met and worked with people within the R&D department. You're likely to have met and worked with the PI. You may have also been involved in meetings of if it's a multi-site or multi-department study. So I would say that you do have some collaborations. I think it's all about thinking about, are those collaborations kind of, you know, no one's expecting you to be you know, mixing with people who publish in the New England Journal of Medicine all the time. You know, I've been working in academia since 2005, and I've never met any of these people yet, and I've never met any of these clients who have all of those. It's about sort of thinking realistically, and this is where sometimes it's really hard for us as advisors, because we want to delve into your heads and just kind of see what happens in your world over a week, and then we could be like, oh my gosh, you do much more of this, but you don't realize that you do it, or you undersell what it is that you do. So there is possibilities of the RDS sharing with you examples of successful applications, such that you can say, well, oh my gosh, actually I do that and I didn't think about that. or I wouldn't have described it in such a great way, or in such a positive way, such that it sounds as impressive as it does. And this is what we mean about the grantsmanship component of fellowship applications. So I think most people can describe it, but it's also about thinking about where you are on that pathway. And if you are an early career researcher, then gosh, no one will be expecting you to kind of rub shoulders with professors or clinical academics from all these stellar centres. It's about showing that you can work with other people and that you do work with other people. It's not about how amazing those other people are, because everyone is amazing in their own right. And actually what we really want to demonstrate is that you've got good communication skills, is that you're able to work collaboratively. That's what they want an evidence of. It's not about who you're working with per se.
Excellent, thank you very much. Nicholas has popped a question in. I'm not quite sure whether this is in your remit or whether it should have been for Richard Mildham from the NIHR TCC a couple of months ago, but I'm going to put it to you, and feel free to bounce it. So he says, thanks very much for a great talk. He wants to know about the possibility of or feasibility of converting a self-funded doctorate into a funded fellowship.
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I probably should have mentioned in the talk is that on the NIHR website, even if you go on now, if you've got no intention of applying for a fellowship right now, I would get on the website, have a look at the eligibility criteria, have a look at the guidance for applicants. And it does state there within the guidance for applicants document about the criteria in terms of if you've already started some work on this, and it depends upon whether you've already registered for a PhD with it, and if so, when that was, and there's some timing components around that, and I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head, but that information should be there. I think if it's within a short period of time, then you should be okay. The problem with that potentially is that, as you'll have seen from this whole quick presentation today, is there's an awful lot of things to consider in a fellowship application. And if I'm being very, very honest, a good fellowship application, it takes about 12 months to be developed at the minimum. I've known some people work on these for up to 2 years, because some of the wins that you need to be able to do to demonstrate that you're a safe pair of hands, to demonstrate that you work with other people, or that you've disseminated research, these things don't happen quickly. Your collaborations don't happen quickly, so it can take a long time in order to be able to do these things. So my worry, Nicholas, is that if you are already registered for a PhD, then are you going to be able to get everything all set and all geared up for the application, such that that time period still fits within the eligibility criteria? But I would have a look at the guidance document.
I completely agree. I think the guidance document and also the chair's reports are invaluable resources that will help people draft and get their application fellowship in the right place for before they submit. So they are amazing resources on the website. And again, if there's any questions, phone the Academy as well. That they're very happy to help answer those questions if we can't find those answers. So I don't see anybody else's hand up, and I don't see any questions, and I'm aware that we are running towards the end of our time.
May I just say one more thing?
Yep.
So I did mention that the RDS is a national service, and we're split over a number of regions, but I'm aware that some people might be on the webinar today who might not necessarily be in Yorkshire and Humber. We have 3 sites in Yorkshire and Humber, Leeds, Sheffield and York, but as I mentioned, we are obviously working remotely at the minute, and we can be very flexible in terms of phone or sort of like a web call. But there are other regions as well. So if you are outside of Yorkshire and Humber, you can still access the RDS. Just check us out on the website. We often do courses for fellowships. In fact, there's one tomorrow. It's probably too late to sign up for it tomorrow, but we do these regularly throughout the year. But also other events for clients as well, like grant writing workshops and so on. So we are there. There's lots of information about patient public involvement on there. Even if you're not necessarily wanting to do it for a funding application, it can be just quite useful to embed within your own sort of work and your clinical and research activities. So, you know, check it out. There's a whole host of stuff up there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jill. Without further ado, then I'm going to close this session. Jill, I can't thank you enough for your time, and it was a really amazing presentation.